say thank you also to all the organizers, to Magda and Bernie and Ted and everyone who's put this together the last few years. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource. That's why I'm giving an introduction. A wonderful resource and a wonderful opportunity to be here. Today I want to take the workshop model in focus, although you have in the booklet a couple texts and several textiles, several ritual objects from Prague. I wanted to look at this one as our main focus and bring the texts and the other objects to sort of help put it in context. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. This is a Zaks Parokhet given by Natan, son of Issachar, called Karpel Zaks, and Hadassi, daughter of Moshe, in the year 5362, 160102, in Prague, probably given to the Altneu Shul. Presumably Hadassi was Natan's wife. And I want to use this object, which, as I said, I'll talk about a little bit more in just a minute, as a prism to look at the intersection of a few different phenomena that are characteristic of Prague in this period and of other places and times. One being material culture, particularly material culture in the sacred space, obviously represented by the curtain for the Ark of the Torah Scrolls, known as a parochet. Another phenomena being liturgy, particularly local liturgy, the use of sacred time. And the third component being memory, how those two items, how ritual objects, material culture, together with local liturgy, are used, the intersection of those two phenomena are used by families and by the community in Prague to preserve their own local memories. And I came to ritual objects, I started looking at the objects in Prague as part of an investigation of this community's memory, of the memory of early modern Jews, which for Prague, for this period, for various reasons, I define as approximately 1580 to 1730. The way the Jews of that community looked at, remembered, recorded, recalled, tried to perpetuate events and individuals that were part of their own community for their own community's future. In other words, not as opposed to, but in addition to being part of the overall spectrum of Jewish life from the beginning, from the rabbis to the Messianic age and so forth, how this community does or doesn't, and in what ways, by posing the question I answered, that the fact that I thought that it does, take an interest in its own particular history and the history of its families. Now, when I assumed that I would look at ritual objects as part of this investigation, it didn't take me very long to realize that the obvious association of memory with ritual objects, in even posing that, putting those two things together, I was really bringing a contemporary assumption based on contemporary Jewish practice in the United States and other places, that somebody gives a parochet, a Torah curtain, or a Torah mantle, or some other object to a synagogue in memory of a deceased loved one, very often, most often, an ancestor, somebody who's older, in the course of the ordinary life cycle, that this is a way we express memory in this space. When I began to look at the objects, I saw that in the 17th century, at least in the 16th and early 17th century, it didn't work exactly that way. It worked in a different way. There still is an association with memory, but we need to throw out some of those modern assumptions about how it worked. I want to, before I come to discuss this parochet, first of all make a little bit of a disclaimer that I am coming from this historical, social, and cultural historical point of view. Vivian Mann is one of the pioneers in the field of investigating these particular objects from Prague. Another woman named Bracha Yaniv, who is a scholar in Israel, has done extensive research on the Prague Parochot. And I am not an art historian. I will say a little bit about the iconography, but I'd welcome any comments that people have about how that relates to my overall historical claims. That's really I find myself, despite best intentions, being drawn, of course, to the text and to the texts that surround these things.